Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Rob Jr. and this is my channel, Creative Rob. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be working on a airbrush beach scene. It's your classic airbrush t-shirt design. So let's jump right on in and have some fun. To start off, we are going to create the sand, and it's going to be 2 hills. And we're using the airbrush, the soft airbrush, and now what we're going to do is grab this smudge tool. It's that blue hand up there, and on each end of the line we're going to smudge it out till it fades out and is at a nice point. And what I'm doing here is I use the selection tool. It's that arrow up there, and I just resized it with the settings on uniform. And now we're creating a new layer, and we're grabbing a nice electric blue, and we're grabbing this smudge tool again and smudging those ends of the lines out. And there, what I was doing is adding a little Gaussian blur. Just hit that magic wand tool and hit Gaussian blur. You touch the screen and drag it to the right. Alright, so on another layer, let's choose the airbrush tool again, and let's resize it to about this size here. And once you draw your line and you stop, you can actually, if you hold it in place, you can resize it and get a nice straight line. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going to the next layer, and I'm just moving things around, which you can do with the selection tool. I'm just trying to get some nice symmetry going on in this design. Want everything to be nice and even. I will eventually move that horizon line down. So now we're using the Gaussian blur on the layer with the outside ring. Alright, so let's create a new layer. Grab your airbrush, and we're going to do that one more time. And add a Gaussian blur. We're not going to make the blur quite as much as we did with the last one, because we want this to be a little bit bolder and have a nice airbrush look. If you pinch your 2 layers together, it'll make it into one. You just pinch it with your fingers, the 2 layers you want. Now here I'm just dragging that. You don't want that horizon line to be directly in the middle of this circle. You want it to be kind of halfway between the middle and the bottom. Now what I would suggest if you're following along is once I create a line, I would stop the video and make that line and get it perfect, then replay the video. Alright, so now on a new layer, what I'm doing is we're adding the waves, and we're using the soft airbrush, the smaller one, and we're making the brush, we're choosing a smaller brush size. And if you make a mistake, you can tap with your 2 fingers on the screen and it will undo what you just did. Alright, let's grab the smudge tool. And at the end of the lines, we're going to smudge it out till it's a nice, sharp, and faded out line, just like an airbrush. Alright, hitting those lines with the Gaussian blur. You don't want to blur it out too much. So we created a new layer and we got a darker blue, and what we're going to do is from the outside go almost to the middle and stop on both sides. We don't want to make one line that goes all the way through because we want a little gap in between those blues, because that's where the reflection of the sun is going to go. And with the selection tool, I've just resized that, moved it down, and added the Gaussian blur and lowered the opacity. If I'm going too fast for you, just pause the video, rewind, take your time, have some fun. This is a nice, fun design. So on a new layer, let's create this line, and what this line is going to be is, and again, we're hitting it with the smudge tool on the ends. This line is going to represent the clouds that are way back there. It almost looks like a fog on the horizon. And hit it with that Gaussian blur. Now let's create a new layer and get you a nice yellow. And we're going to use a airbrush, the bigger one. Let's fill this in, but don't do the very middle. We want that to be white. And now hit that with the Gaussian blur. You don't want to do it too much. Now, I used the selection tool and sized it down a little bit. You want it to overlap the blue just a little bit, give a little hint of green on the very inner edge of that blue. Now create a new layer and get that smaller soft airbrush. Now let's create some clouds. I went with a little bit of a thicker brush than I started off with for these clouds. Let's give it a nice cloudy shape. And hit it with the Gaussian blur. Not too much, just give it a nice little fuzz. And now what I'm doing is I sized that brush down smaller, and I was outlining the tops of the clouds. And now with the smudge tool, I'm going in and adding more texture to the tops of those clouds. Don't be afraid to get a little bit of that yellow as you're smudging mixed in with the pink. It just gives it a little more color. Grab that smudge tool and drag the ends of those clouds out a little bit. Alright, so we want to give some texture to the bottom of the cloud, but not too much. I kind of overdid it there. I will tap my fingers and undo that. It went better with one stroke, like that, and like that. There, that was what I wanted. And now I'm still using the smudge tool, made the brush smaller, and I'm just giving those smaller lines a little more character. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's my dog snoring in the background. And once again, I hit it with the Gaussian blur a little bit and lowered the opacity. It was a little too opaque. We're trying to give the illusion of clouds here, mixed with the airbrush kind of feel. So Okay, now we're on another layer. We're going to choose the S looking tool at the top, and that's where you can make an ellipse or eclipse, I mean, and it's just a circle, and we're going to invert that, and we're going to hit it with a nice orange color. And if any of your orange goes into that water, just grab the eraser and erase it. Now I'm using the Gaussian blur to kind of fade that in to the atmosphere a little bit. Now we want the sun to be behind everything, so make sure you layer it correctly. Now I was feeling like this was a little too light, so I'll go back in with the orange and make it thicker, a little bit wider, and then I'm going to hit it with the Gaussian blur after I move it back down behind everything. Nice. And I'm just erasing the orange in the water. Now with the selection tool, I'm going to resize this and position it a little bit better. So on another layer, we're going to create I don't know what kind of clouds these are called, but they're usually way up in the sky. They're one of the highest clouds, and they're in that jet stream of air getting stretched out. So what we want to do is you want to make the ends closer to you, thicker, and the ones closer to the sun, thinner, to give the illusion of them being stretched out. Now if you guys are following along and you want to share your artwork, look me up on Instagram. It's creative_Rob. Feel free to tag me in any of your work. I'd love to see it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will get back to you. Let me know if you liked this project. I thought it was kind of interesting to make an airbrush design with Procreate on your iPad. It's kind of cool. Now what I did after I created those lines is I blurred them out, used the opacity, but I used a selection tool and I warped it out a little bit. Now I know that was pretty fast, so feel free to rewind and stop and see exactly what I did. If you follow exactly what I do, you will have a nice airbrushed beach scene. You might have to try twice, but you can do it. Now here I'm just resizing things, making it look better. Alright, on a new layer, using the airbrush tool, we are outlining the sand, and this is going to represent the shadows on the sand. And just give the sand a little color. These are nice sunset colors. I guess this could be sunrise, but I think my favorite time of the day is sunset. Beautiful colors, especially if you're on the beach. Alright, so let's create a new layer, grab the soft airbrush, and now we're creating the palm tree. So just remember the bottom of the tree is going to be a little bit thicker than the top. And now we're going to create the branches or the leaves. So it's going to be 5 lines like so. Kind of looks like a star. And now you go in on one side of the line and create these. The actual leaf itself. It's almost like a bunch of little leaves, and all you're doing is creating those lines. It's really easy to do. Then go on the other side and just do a few. You don't want to do the whole other side. This helps give the illusion of the limb, the leaves being bent and such. Now the smudge tool is what tops this off. Get the smudge tool and re-go over all of those lines you made, like so. This really gives it an airbrush look. And add some texture on the trunk there, but not too much or it'll look funny. And now here I just use the selection tool and I'm just resizing and trying to get a good flow going with the design. Alright, so now I'm going to use the organic brush tool, and I forgot the name of this brush, but go back and pause it so you can see. And what you do is you just tap once and it'll give you a couple of these bushes, but just erase the other one and then select this bush, and I lowered the brightness on it so it appears darker, and select it and move it to the bottom of this tree, this palm tree. Alright, so now I want to duplicate this. So what I'm going to do is grab that free hand, click that, and grab the free hand tool. I'm just circling it, and then I hit copy and paste. So now that automatically put it on another layer. And I flipped it horizontally and resized it. Alright, so I need to create another one. So this is another way to duplicate. You can actually go to that layer, slide left, and it'll give you the option to duplicate. So that's how I made this bush right here. And then I again flipped it horizontally. And this one needs to be smaller because it's further out in the distance. And there I'm just pinching all those organic features together, the trees and bushes. And don't forget to change your brush. So here what I'm doing is creating the shadow. So create a new layer and you get a black. You can also use a dark purple. Matter of fact, I wish I used a dark purple. And after you make those lines, grab the smudge tool and smudge it a little bit so it shows the leaves in the shadow. And go to the Gaussian blur and blur that out, and then lower the opacity so it's not so strong. And there I'm using the selection tool to resize and shape those shadows. Now I thought I didn't like the ones I created, so I'm going to try this again, but I already know that it didn't work out, so I end up tapping my fingers back to the original shadows. But this is what's great about doing digital painting. You have the option to try things, and you don't have to let the paint dry to fix it. Or with oils, scrape it off. Alright, so let's create a new layer. And we're going to create the reflection of the sun. You just draw one vertical line and then a few horizontal lines that get smaller as they go near you. And you're going to hit that with the Gaussian blur, and that just gives a nice reflection. You may want to do it one more time. I actually do it towards the end of the video. So let's create another layer and create a horizontal line. And I think this one ended up being a little thicker than I wanted, so I made it smaller. And this is going to go in between the top of the water and then that other blue line, which I said was the clouds way back there. And we're going to Gaussian blur that and then lower the opacity. And it just separates that misty clouds from the water. And now on another layer, we're going to create the highlights on the sand. Just find a nice size that you like. I like mine to be a little thinner right here. I thought it looks better. Don't be afraid to try things. Also hit that with the Gaussian blur. Alright, so on another layer, we're going to add some highlights to the clouds, just the top. I'm going to do this with a pretty thin airbrush. Alright, so now I'm grabbing the smudge tool and I'm going to kind of blend this in and make the tops of those clouds look a little more realistic and look like they're capturing some of that sunlight. And this just makes it a little fluffier. Now, if you're smudging this and it's not working for you, you can leave it like this, and I think it still looks good. But I was going for a little more realistic. So I created those lines. Now I'm adding the Gaussian blur and I'm lowering the opacity. Now I'm going in and smudging it up. So I'm just going in and smudging that, blending it together. Nothing too dramatic. You don't have to spend too much time on this part. It is a fun part to spend time on though. You can get pretty detailed. And once again, I am going back over with a white, with a very thin airbrush. Hit that with the Gaussian blur, lower the opacity a little bit. And this time when I'm blurring it, I'm actually trying to not go into the pink, but outwards. and just barely doing it. Just getting a little fluff. And like I said, if you're having trouble with this part, leaving it how it is right now would look totally fine. Some people might prefer that. You know, it's your art, do what you want. Whoops. Hit the wrong button there. Alright guys, that's just about it. I think I'm going to hit it again with another reflection of the sun, and I'm going to adjust the colors a little bit. But you know, if you, like I said earlier, if you guys followed along and created this, feel free to tag me on Instagram, creative_Rob. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll get back to you. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's a lot of fun. You know, it's a fun design for beginners, you know, get you familiar with some of the brushes, and it's even a fun one for people who are experienced. Just, it's a nice fun design. It's fun to do this and show off to people, you know. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Just thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And I look forward to doing this again. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.